there. I don't think that was the way Paul had intended, but he'd always planned to go and visit them. But every time that he had planned to, he'd come up with some hindrance or other. He wants to come to visit them so that he can impart some spiritual gift that will help them to become strong. You know, I thought about putting, big muscle man builders up there, but I thought, oh no, Legos are much better. He's a really mean-looking Lego guy. He's really got a pumping iron there, or plastic, or whatever that is. But Paul wanted to help the Roman believers to become strong. And so he wanted to give them a gift. Now, spiritual gifts and spiritual blessings are different than other gifts. I mean, these people all have gifts. I mean, there's Iron Man up here, very smart. He's got, a nuclear heart. And here's Captain Kirk. I don't know what he's good at. Let's see. Green Lantern. Oh, yeah, he's good. This is James Bond, I think. Spider-Man. My favorite, Spider-Man. They all have strengths. But I don't think that's what God wants us to have. He wants us to be spiritually strong. And so I went looking for pictures of people who are spiritually strong. This guy did not meet my stereotype. He's lying on the beach, he's got a bandana on, he's tanning, but he's reading his Bible, he's studying the Word, he's writing notes down, he's got prayer requests, he's meeting with the Lord, he's finding out what God wants him to do. He is spiritually strong. This is what God wants us to do. This does not depend on your age. It doesn't depend on your physical abilities or your talents. It depends on how much of a relationship you have with God. And that can increase every day of your life. And it needs to increase every day of your life. We need to become spiritually strong. And you can do this no matter what you look like and no matter who you are. You can become spiritually strong. What Paul meant by spiritual gift is not entirely clear. He may have had in mind a specific gift. The gift of encouragement or the gift of works or the gift of administration or all the other gifts that he might have had. But I'm not sure he was talking about that either, because he never uses these particular words that he uses in Romans to talk about spiritual gifts. He may have been talking about a general spiritual blessing. And that's a possibility as well. He just wants to bless them spiritually somehow. But that doesn't seem to match up with the idea of a gift. And so we come to a kind of an impasse here. By the way, that painting is of the Irish blessing and God's blessing you. I don't know how it fits in, but it was peculiar. You can puzzle that out later. But God wants to bless us, and Paul wants to bless the Romans. He wants to help them to become spiritually strong. He wants them to become strengthened. And he wanted to do that with all of the people that he ministered to. He wanted to help to strengthen them in all of their work. Paul immediately qualifies this purpose, though, by saying that he not only wants to come and strengthen them, but he anticipates that they will help to strengthen him. This isn't coming home to your mom and having food laid out on the table. She's blessing you. And you sit there and go, oh, thanks, and snarf it all down. This is more like a potluck, where everybody brings food, and everybody blesses other people with food. This is everybody having a part. Paul wants to strengthen them, but he knows that they will be able to strengthen him. And this is how church works. We all have strength that we can impart to other people. We all see God from a slightly different angle. And so we can explain God in ways that other people haven't heard about. And so we all help to strengthen each other. And this is why we need to be ministering together. This is why we need to be working together. This is why we need to be fellowshipping together. This is why all of the talking before church is such a great thing. This is why Sunday school is such a great thing, because you have an opportunity to share what God has taught you about whatever subject you're talking about. This is why we need to have times where we talk about spiritual things so that we can strengthen one another. This isn't just the pastor coming on Sunday morning and preparing a feast, okay, or somebody on TV. This is you ministering to me, and I minister to you, and the Sunday school teachers minister to you, and you minister to them. We all minister to each other in all kinds of ways. And Paul knew that as well. Paul anticipates a time of mutual edification with them. And then he moves on to his plans for making a visit. He's talked about the gospel, and he talks about his being the apostle to the Gentiles. Well, he wants to build on those relationships, and he wants to talk about the plans that he has. Now, he's apparently aware, and evidently somebody in Rome has been saying, oh, Paul has been ignoring us. Oh, this Paul guy might be good for the sticks, but how does this play in the big city? And so he's aware that some people may have been saying some things about him, that he hasn't come to Rome. And why has he been ignoring them for so long? Well, he hasn't ignored them because of a desire to not minister them, but he has not come because he hasn't had the opportunity. Now, we don't exactly know what the roadblocks were that kept him from Rome. It could have been ministries to other churches. It could have been the political climate. It might have just, it obviously was where the Lord had led him, because he was constantly, going places because of what God had taught. But he'd pretty much spent all of his time over here in the eastern half of the Roman Empire. But he also had plans to go to Rome, and he also had plans to go on to Spain. He wanted to minister everywhere. He had been called as an apostle to the Gentiles, and he wanted to minister to as many Gentiles as he could come into contact with. But he just had not had the opportunity to get there. He wanted to preach to them not because, he wanted to gain a huge group of friends on Facebook. He wasn't trying to enlarge his territory, his social network. He just had gifts and knowledge that he wanted to impart to the world. God had spoken to him. He'd been called as this apostle, and he wanted to minister to all kinds of people. In another book, he said, woe to me if I do not preach the gospel. It just burned him up inside if he didn't have the opportunity to share with other people about the good news of Jesus Christ. He talks about he mentions 4 different kinds of people that he wants to minister. And I believe that all 4 of these people, the Greeks and the non-Greeks, the wise and the foolish, all have to do with Gentiles. He was an apostle. He'd been called as an apostle to the Gentiles. And I think that these words all describe those Gentiles. The Greek word for Greek is Helen. So if you see Helen, you can just call her Greek. But the Greek word, the other word for non-Greek, is actually the word for barbarian. It's the Greek word barbaros. So if you know somebody whose name is Barbara, do you know anybody named Barbara? She's a barbarian. But what they meant by that was not the word barbarian that we think of. We think of, barbarian as being violent and crude and horrible person. But they were thinking of people who were actually just from the sticks. They didn't speak, good Nebraska English. We speak it right. They spoke Greek with an accent, or they spoke Greek poorly. And so anybody who didn't speak Greek with a proper dialect and the proper accents and the proper tones and in the proper way, they called them a barbarian because they were from the sticks. And I think the other words too, Greek and non-Greek is just what Paul's way of referring to all of Gentile humanity. The relationship between the first pair, Greek and non-Greek, and wise and unwise, is a little more difficult to figure out, but I really believe that it is part of Paul saying this has to do with Gentiles. And I think it may be the same description. Wise being those who had been educated in the Greek ways and educated and were used to big city life and were sophisticated, and unwise being those people who didn't have necessarily those advantages or disadvantages, depending on how you look at them. Paul wanted to minister to every Gentile, all kinds of people, everyone that he could come into contact with. As we apply this, we have to be a little bit careful, as we are always careful when we apply stories or we apply the non-teaching parts of the Bible. The reason why you have to be careful with that is because you can look at the non-teaching parts of the Bible, the stories, the histories, the poetry, and